I know it's just small talk, but I think I speak for a lot of us when I say I'm ready for this winter to finally be over, and I'm so excited for spring and spring knitting, and especially being able to wear my knits as outerwear again. And to get us both in a more spring appropriate mood and remind ourselves that brighter and warmer days are coming, I decided to make this list of floral colorwork patterns you can knit this spring, and hopefully this list will inspire you to cast on your future favorite knit. And as always, if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing so you don't miss my future videos. So this list will mostly consist of sweater patterns, but I've also included a couple of cardigans and accessories, and I just love all of these. I can't wait to share them with you. Of course, the glue that holds this list together is the fact that all of these have either colorwork or intarsia and have some sort of floral motif involved, and I've tried to mix more beginner-friendly patterns with the ones that are more kind of advanced and adventurous. But regardless of where you are in your knitting journey, I think you will benefit greatly from the sponsor of today's video, Craftsy. I have been a fan of Craftsy for a while, and they have also been a great supporter of this channel, so I'm super excited to talk about them again. Craftsy is an amazing online community and resource for creatives of all skill levels, all interests, and regardless of what your passion is, you will always find something on Craftsy that will help you stay inspired and grow in your craft. They have over 2,000 classes in more than 20 different categories, including knitting, sewing, crochet, embroidery, painting, woodworking, and so much more. So even if you want to try out a new craft you haven't tried before, you're in good hands with Craftsy. As you may already know, I'm a big fan of their knitting classes, especially the ones from Nancy Bush called Estonian Lace Explained. And although I'm yet to find the time to actually cast on my Estonian lace shawl because I have so many other projects going on at the moment, I know that once I get to it, it will be an absolute breeze because Nancy is an amazing teacher and she goes into an incredible amount of detail on the techniques and construction methods involved. She basically holds your hand all the way through, so even if you're not familiar with intricate lace or in general haven't knit lace before, you'll still be able to grasp all of the material presented in the class. All Craftsy classes are taught by friendly and knowledgeable professionals who provide you with detailed video instructions and downloadable content. Craftsy is always adding new classes, so you'll never run out of things to explore, and it's a perfect platform for you if you want to dive into a new hobby or stay inspired. So if you want to join Craftsy, the first 1,000 of you watching this video to scan the QR code or use my link in the description will get a full year of Craftsy Premium membership for just $1.49. And this offer is valid for new members only, but it will include access to every single Craftsy class and every category for a full year. So please make sure you scan the QR code or use my link in the description. And thank you so much, Craftsy, for sponsoring today's video. So we'll start this list with a really lovely and vibrant design called the Apple Flower by Clara Eggers. This pattern has just recently been released, and it's a part of the 52 Weeks of Sweaters book from Lane, so unfortunately it's not available separately just yet, but even if you buy this book just for this pattern, you still will not be disappointed since it has so many other beautiful sweaters. This design is a raglan bottom-up construction with an all-over colorwork motif, and it has 2 contrast colors and 1 main color. You might know I'm not really a fan of bottom-up constructions, but I really like the fit and the general kind of look of Clara Eggers' design, so I really trust her vision and process here. The body and sleeves are knit separately in the round, and then all the 3 pieces are joined together to start knitting the raglan, and of course it's shaped with decreases, but the shaping on the neckline and to raise the back of the neck is not done with German short rows, but instead you do it by binding off stitches and you knit it flat, but there is no flat color work involved. And then of course you finish it off with a really squishy folded neckline done in the main color. So the fit of this sweater is quite oversized, but not too much. It has about 10 to 15 centimeters of positive ease included, and of course you can go up a size or down a size if you want to change that. And in general, the size range here is pretty wide and inclusive. It goes up to 173 centimeters finished bust. It's knit on 4.5 millimeter needles, with the optional increase for colorwork being on 5.5 millimeter needles, and it's intended for DK weight or sport weight held together with a strand of silk mohair or a lace weight yarn. This pattern has a couple of different yarn suggestions mentioned on the Ravelry page and in the book, but the ones I want to mention is, first of all, Atlas by Sandnes Garn, used in a single strand. It's a very squishy Norwegian wool and merino mix, and it's quite toothy but not itchy or like scratchy in any way. It's just matte and has enough grip to it to be perfect for color work. And for a 2-strand combo, the pattern recommends Jensen from Isager held together with their silk mohair. I have recently finally tried Isager silk mohair, and it is so good. Like, I didn't expect it to be this good. It is truly the softest and just the most perfect mohair I've ever used. And I've also heard that Ito silk mohair might be better, but for now I have no idea how it can get any better than this. And on the other hand, Jensen from Isager has no business being as itchy as it is, so I don't know, perhaps these two yarns balance each other out, and I'd be really interested to know your thoughts if you used these yarns together. But the alternative I propose is Isager silk mohair held together with Loch Lomond from BC Garn, and it's the combo I'm using for one of the cardigans I'm knitting right now, and I'm enjoying it so much. It is really buttery, really soft, but has enough structure to it, so I think it will still be great for this pattern, and the gauge would match pretty well. This design is kind of a mix of a striped sweater with an all-over colorwork one, and you always alternate the contrast color you use for the background stripe and for the flower, and the background stripes really make the flowers pop, in my opinion, and kind of create the illusion of you knitting with more colors than you actually do, because in reality you only knit with 2 colors at a time. Additionally, one of the yarn recommendations in the pattern asks you to use a thicker yarn combo for one of the contrast colors, which sort of adds to this 3D effect of the overall design. And the colorwork motif itself is really simple, but there are some long floats that you need to be mindful of and sort of catch them when you knit, but otherwise it should be really simple to memorize, especially since you just repeat kind of the same flower over and over for the whole sweater. But also, because it's knit bottom up, you really need to make sure that you hit the row gauge intended in the pattern to avoid any length or fit issues later on when you get to the top of the sweater. I really love how playful and sort of cheerful this design is, but I also think it would look really fun in a monochrome version, so with black, gray, and white together, and it might be an option for those of you who have trouble finding the perfect color combo. So moving on, our next design is a free pattern from Yerbo, and it's called the Rosa Cardigan. I've had it saved in my Ravelry favorites for years, and when the Rosie pattern was released, it really reminded me of the colorwork motif here, but of course these two patterns are super different. This is a round yoke top-down cardigan with a beautiful rose and leaf motif on the shoulders and a stockinette body, and it also has a garter stitch neckline and button band. It uses 2 contrast colors, so one for the leaf motifs and the other for the rose, and it also has a steek in the middle, so it's fully knit in the round and then kind of cut open. This is a very thorough pattern, and it has instructions on how to do the steeks along with some tips and tricks, so I recommend it even if you haven't tried steeking before. But I'd also recommend practicing on an in the round colorwork swatch first to make sure you got everything right, because I sometimes see people leaving the steeking for last and trying it for the first time on the finished garment, which must be super stressful. There's a really good steeking tutorial on the Brooklyn Tweed website, which has pictures and like written instructions, so it's really easy to follow, and I will link it below. The neckline here is pretty open and low, especially for a crew neck cardigan like this, but it does have shaping. It's done after the colorwork motif is complete, and it's kind of how I prefer it because it prevents this awkward gap at the back of the neck with no colorwork, and it's much more seamless in my opinion. This cardigan is knit on 3.5mm needles and is intended for sport weight yarn, and since this is a Yerbo pattern, of course they recommend their own yarn. They recommend their sport weight wool, which I am not really familiar with, so I'm not really sure if it's good or not. Another sport weight suggestion I can recommend for this is Vovo from Retrosaria. It has a beautiful color selection and it will be just perfect for this gauge. It's a really soft yarn which is made for color work. It's really matte and a little bit toothy without being itchy, so it's going to be great. And if you want to use a combo of fingering weight plus silk mohair, of course, you can go for Knitting for Olive Merino and their silk mohair. A more kind of luxurious option would be to use Cardiff Cashmere Classic in a single strand. It also would work great with this gauge, and I recently tried it for the first time after recommending it in basically all of my roundups, and of course it's exactly as I imagined. It's really soft and it's a little bit thicker than I thought, but still it's great. And I'm currently knitting a shawl from it, just a small triangular shawl, and once I'm done with it, I'm planning to release it as a free pattern once I'm sure that all of my calculations work out. But back to the Rosa cardigan. The sizing here goes up to 152 centimeters finished bust, so it is quite inclusive in that regard, and it only includes 5 to 10 centimeters of positive ease. And the pattern also has a full schematic, so you'll be able to choose your size pretty accurately here. To me, the Rosa cardigan has a really vintage feel, and there's something so effortless about this design despite the pretty intricate rose colorwork motif. And I assume it looks vintage because of the garter button band and neckline, which of course was used much more frequently in vintage patterns than it is now. And in general, it will be a really nice alternative to the more popular at the moment rosy patterns, so maybe give it a go. It will also be a really nice layering piece for spring and summer because of its light gauge. So I don't know, I really like it, and I'm really happy that it's available as a free pattern. And continuing with the roses, of course, the next pattern I'd like to mention is the Rosie Yoke blouse by Lynette. There is also a version called the Rosie Yoke sweater in a slightly thicker gauge, and of course the original Rosie sweater, which has a contiguous sleeve. But the reason I wanted to talk about the Rosie Yoke blouse specifically is because I think its lightweight gauge would make it perfect for spring and summer and like any warm weather in general. This is a top-down round yoke sweater with one rose motif on the shoulders, and the rest is knit in stockinette with 1x1 ribbing. It's knit on 4mm needles with an optional needle size increase for the color work, and it's intended to have 15 to 20 centimeters of positive ease, and the size range goes up to 156 centimeters finished bust. It has only one contrast color and is intended for a fingering weight yarn held together with a strand of silk mohair, but I honestly can't recommend the combo suggested in the pattern. It recommends tin pergint held together with a strand of tin silk mohair, both of course from Sandnes Garn, and while I have nothing against tin pergint, I think it's a classic wool yarn which can be used in many different projects. I really didn't like working with tin silk mohair. It's much rougher than other mohairs in the same price range, so if you want the same effect, you can go for Drops silk mohair, or if you are ready to spend the same amount of money, you can just go for Knitting for Olive or Isager, and it will be much more soft and kind of cloudy, luxurious. I don't know, I just didn't like their mohair. It really disappointed me, but I know that they have recently released another version, maybe like an updated version of their silk mohair called Primo Tin silk mohair or Primo silk mohair. It's supposed to be much closer to other kind of classic silk mohairs we all know and love, so perhaps this one is softer. I don't know, if you've used it, let me know. You can also go for a Cardiff Cashmere Classic in a single strand, which would be great for this gauge and needle size. This pattern would also be a nice option for a warm weather t-shirt if you just knit the sleeves shorter and use a plant-based yarn or a plant-based combo, which is more appropriate for late spring and summer. And of course, my choice and recommendation for a summer yarn would surprise no one. It's Line from Sandnes Garn. I don't know what I would do without this yarn in the summer. It's kind of on the opposite scale of the tin silk mohair, which I really disliked, and this one is just one of my favorites. It's really drapey, really breathable, and would also work perfect with this gauge. In terms of the color work here, I have to be honest, I did not enjoy knitting this rose motif when I was making my Rosie sweater. I had a lot of issues trying to keep track of the color work chart and not making any mistakes because it's not really repetitive or symmetrical or intuitive. It's quite random in terms of how the stitches are placed, and it only repeats every like dozen of stitches, so you have to be really mindful of it. And of course here you will also need to keep track of the increases for the yoke, which are distributed evenly around the sweater and not in the exact 4 places like it was for the contiguous sleeves, but at the same time you only have one motif to go through before you switch to the relief of knitting stockinette, so maybe it's going to be worth it. For me it was, because the sweater is really beautiful in any version that it came out, I still really love this motif, and please try it if by any chance you haven't knit a Rosie sweater yet. And moving on, a very different floral yoke I have for you is the drawing sweater by Tomomi Yoshimoto. I love these asymmetrical Marimekko style daisies here, and they're so whimsical and fun without being too kitschy and kind of too much, which is what I like to go for. However, they are a bit of a commitment because this pattern is even more complicated and kind of random than the Rosie pattern, and it requires your full attention, and there are also a lot of long floats here. It has sort of a gradient going on when it comes to the colors used, because you knit the top of the sweater and the flowers in a lighter color, and then you have two darker colors in the background, so a darker one at the beginning on the chest, and then later you switch to a bit of a lighter color. But of course you can switch it instead to just having one main and one contrast color. But the only note I have is that due to kind of the construction of the sweater, I would not go for a darker top color and then a lighter one at the bottom, because it will really accentuate the kind of square nature of this pattern at the top, because of course it's knit in a raglan and it's a little bit angular here. So when you knit in a lighter color, it really blends it together nicely and hides this angular shape. And also, if you browse the Ravelry project pages for this pattern, of which there are about 1,000 at this point, you will find a couple of versions that use intarsia to create different colored flowers, or for example use a fade colorway to play with the gradient effect, and it's really fun. There are multiple different interpretations of this pattern, and it's really interesting to browse through them. It's intended to be knit on 4mm needles with a single strand of sport weight yarn, or a combo that gives you a sport weight gauge. The main yarn suggestion here is the Rerum Ulysse, I think that's how you pronounce it, and it's a really nice non-superwash matte wool, which would be great for color work. Another great option, especially if you're in the US, would be Purl Soho Good wool. It's a really soft, really squishy kind of classic wool, and it's really pleasant to work with, and it has a beautiful color selection. The sizing in this pattern is a little bit strange, so it has 20 centimeters of positive ease included and only 3 sizes. So it has a finished bust circumference of 105, 118 and 131 centimeters, and of course it's quite a limited size range, but I am ready to give it the benefit of the doubt, because of course with such an intricate and kind of locked in colorwork motif on the yoke, it might be hard to grade this particular design, and this is kind of the only range the designer was able to come up with. So I'm not really sure. I'm not a pattern designer myself. Maybe there's not a particular reason why the size range is so kind of lacking, but at the same time you can increase, for example, your needle size or the weight of the yarn that you're using to get a slightly larger size. But of course it would be much better if you didn't have to do that in the first place. Okay, I think I'm gonna take a break now and enjoy the unexpected sunlight while it's still sunny, because I have a feeling that once it gets dark today, it's gonna be freezing again. So yeah, I'll see you in a second. Listen, you have no idea what kind of drama goes on behind the scenes when it comes to my hair, because every time I try to curl it, it comes out differently. My hair is originally super straight, so I have to recurl it every day, and there's so much product in this. Anyway, that's a long way to say that I'm back and my hair looks a little bit different, but anyway, let's get back to the list. And the next pattern I'd like to talk about is the Poppy Bloom Pullover by Sari Nordlund. This is a round yoke colorwork sweater with a folded neckline, stockinette body, and a beautiful floral design on the yoke and on the cuffs. It's knit top down, starting with the colorwork yoke, and the shaping here is done after you finish with the colorwork. The rest is knit in stockinette with 1x1 ribbing, besides the small leaf motif on the cuffs. And the folded collar here is knit last, so you actually pick it up from the cast-on edge on the yoke here and knit it in the other direction before folding it. And it might seem a little bit counterintuitive to do that when you can just start at the very beginning with the ribbing and knit top down, but it's actually a really nice way to ensure that the neckline has enough structure and doesn't stretch out with all of the weight of the fabric, so I really prefer it. I think I actually mentioned it before in one of my previous roundups. This pullover is quite lightweight and it's knit on 4mm needles and asks for a combination of fingering weight plus silk mohair, but if I have to talk about knitting for all of merino and silk mohair again, I would lose my mind. So instead, what I can recommend is, for example, a really intriguing sock yarn, which I came across recently, and it's Erika Moorland Mohair. This is a non-superwash fingering slash sock yarn, and it doesn't have any synthetic fibers in it. It only has 20% mohair and 80% wool. It has a beautiful slight halo, and it's quite matte, so it's really nice for color work. I'd pair it with, for example, a strand of thinner alpaca, something like Alpaca 1 from Isager or Baby Alpaca from BC Garn. A single strand option can be, for example, Yak's Tibetan Cloud, which is a really plush, really velvety wool, and it's sport to light DK weight. The size range here is quite wide. It goes up to 170 centimeters finished bust, and it has 15 centimeters of positive ease included. The colorwork yoke here has about 5 different motifs, and they all blend together really nicely and really frame the central flower. Also, I really like the detail of the sleeve. Motifs run in different directions on the cuffs. I think it frames the sweater even more. And this design also really reminds me of azulejo tiles, which I know is like saying chai tea, and it's kind of redundant, but you know what I mean. It reminds me of this variety of really symmetrical and kind of rounded designs on the ceramic Portuguese tiles, and I think if you choose the right color scheme, you can kind of accentuate the similarities even more. And next I have a sweater with a really similar flower motif, but in a completely different interpretation and construction. It's the Marie sweater from Marie Scrindo. This one might be the trendiest on my list, and I really like this design. Something about it really appealed to me, despite the fact that I don't usually go for constructions like this. This is a very cozy, fluffy sweater, and it also kind of reminds me of the sweaters in the 80s. It's a really oversized, relaxed design. It's knit in one strand of bulky mohair on 5mm needles with an optional increase to 5.5 for the color work. The sweater is designed to be quite oversized, and it has about 20 to 30 centimeters of positive ease included, but the size range here is not great. It only has 3 sizes and goes up to 130 centimeters bust. Again, I'm not sure it's intentional. Maybe it's really hard to grade a pattern with such a large flower motif. So the construction of this sweater is also really relaxed and chill, shall we say, and it's knit bottom up with the sleeves and the body knit separately in the round, and then you split for front and back and knit the colorwork flat before you bind off the shoulders and seam them together. So you can instead use a 3-needle bind off to join the shoulder stitches together and reduce bulk in this area. And the sleeves here are also mattress stitched to the body. So this construction is one of the simplest there is. There's absolutely nothing bad about a simple construction like this, and it's really convenient for beginners or somebody who is just trying out new techniques like colorwork, for example. But of course, if you have more experience, you can rework this into a top-down pattern or add some additional advanced details or structure or shaping. The suggested yarn here is Bella by Permin, a really fluffy mohair and wool blend. And another one I can recommend is, for example, Melody from Drops, which is a little bit thicker but can work quite well for this gauge. If you don't want to use a really fluffy sort of 80s style mohair here, you can go for something more smooth. For example, Brisa by BC Garn, it's a cotton, alpaca, and wool blend in a chainette strand. And another option is, for example, Katia Cotton Merino. Both are really nice for a mid-season version of the sweater and less of a halo-heavy statement piece. And moving on, the next sweater I'd like to talk about is the only intarsia pattern on the list, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I think about this sweater every single day. I'm not sure if people still say this, but if they do, like, this is my Roman Empire. I just have it ingrained in my mind, and this is the Hollyhock sweater by Erika. It was published for Rowan Magazine Japan some time ago, and it's one of the most beautiful knitting patterns I've ever seen. It's truly a work of art, and it's on par with Herbert Niebling's doily patterns, which is another dream knit of mine. Apart from the incredibly intricate intarsia motif on the front, on the back, and on the sleeves, it's actually a really straightforward sweater. It's knit bottom up in panels and then seamed up. It's a drop shoulder design. The pattern has very minimal written instructions, and it has a full chart for both the body and the sleeves, but it's only available in Japanese. It's not available as a separate PDF pattern, and it also only comes in one size, so it has a lot going against it, but I don't know, it's still one of the most stunning knitting patterns I've ever seen, so I can't help but mention it here. The one size the sweater comes in has a finished bust circumference on 106 centimeters, and there is no information on ease in the pattern, and it's also knit on Japanese size 6 needles, which is kind of in between 3.75 and 4 millimeters, so either can be used depending on your tension. The stunning and almost watercolor intarsia motif here comes in 3 different color schemes for each of the hollyhocks on the front and back, and the middle one is repeated on the sleeves. Because it's a Rowan pattern, it of course asks for a combo of Rowan yarns, so in this case it's kid silk haze held together with felted tweed, and you achieve different shades by either holding the felted tweed double with a strand of silk mohair, or holding 4 strands of silk mohair together, or sometimes you hold the same shade of tweed with different silk mohair to achieve a slight difference in tone. Also, I've counted, and suppose you don't have any leftover or scrap or stash yarn you can use for this, and you decide to buy the quantity from scratch, and in this case you will need 14 different shades of kid silk haze and 13 different shades of felted tweed with almost 30 balls in total, and also the fact that the colors are created by mixing and matching different shades makes it really hard to substitute. And you'll also have a ton of yarn left over, because for some of the shades you only need 10 grams to use in the actual sweater. So naturally, with a lot of planning and matching different shades and a lot of swatching, you might come up with something to use from stash, or substitute this yarn with something else, but I'm also not sure how to go about it, because both the kid silk haze and felted tweed have really detailed, varied shade cards, and it might be hard to match different yarns to it. And I know I'm telling you this I'm trying to talk you out of knitting this pattern, but I'm actually talking myself out of it, because as I said, I can't stop thinking about it. I try to come up with solutions for me to knit this, and I've never knit intarsia before, so I'm not sure it's going to be a good project to knit intarsia for the first time, but I can't get it out of my mind, I'm sorry. And somehow intricate intarsia was not enough for this pattern, because it also has a really beautiful mock cable motif on the cuffs and neckline and hem instead of standard 1x1 ribbing. It looks really beautiful and is a lot simpler to knit compared to the rest of the pattern. On another note, I'd like to thank Crystal on Ravelry. Her handle is CrystalX, and her project page for her version of the Hollyhock pattern has so many beautiful detailed pictures of her progress and the finished object, and it gives you a good glimpse into the process of knitting this sweater. It's really useful, especially for such a hard to find design, so I'm gonna link it below. So the last sweater I'd like to talk about before we move on to accessories is something that might seem like a piece of cake compared to the previous design, but it also has a beautiful intricate flower motif. It's called the Midsummer sweater by Maaike van Heijn, and it's part of the Art of the Sea book by Lane. The sweater is intended to be really lightweight, super blousy, and perfect for late spring and summer, and it's mostly knit in stockinette. It's a really straightforward round yoke construction, but of course it has this really delicate, beautiful flower wreath motif which repeats on the yoke and on the sleeves. It's knit on 3.5 millimeter needles with an optional increase for the color work, and it's designed for sport weight yarn and is intended to have about 10 to 20 centimeters of positive ease. Like most other designs from Lane, it's pretty size inclusive and wide in range, and it goes up to 178 centimeters of finished bust. The sweater uses 6 different contrast colors for the flowers, which of course doesn't sound as bad as the previous design where it was 25 different colors, but anyway, the main yarn suggestion here is La Bien Aimee Sport Noveau, and it has a lot of really vibrant hand-dyed colors. Of course, La Bien-Aimée is kind of famous for having a really like stunning color selection, and some of the colors for this yarn are speckled or have some sort of really fun variegation in them, which might be really interesting to play with in this design. Since you only need a very small amount of yarn for the contrast colors, you might actually want to use some leftovers or scraps, and even though it is designed for sport weight yarn, I don't think it's going to be the end of the world if you just use sock yarn for this, or just any scraps of fingering weight yarn you have lying around. Another yarn suggestion I can think of for this is Semilla Melange from BC Garn, a really nice lightweight wool, and it also has a really vibrant color selection. Since I'm not kidding myself and thinking that once March starts it's going to be sunny and warm every day, I still think there's time to knit a couple of accessories, and the first one is the Fjellflora pattern, and it's a free pattern for Colorwork mittens with a triangular tip and ribbed cuffs, and it uses 4 contrast colors to create this really cute wildflower motif. Here you're mostly knitting with 2 colors at a time, but in the center of the daisy repeat you do have a couple of rounds where you need to carry 3 colors at the same time. With Colorwork mittens like this, they always go a lot faster than you first expect, because here, for example, you always switch colors and kind of go from one motif to the next. You're always really close to the end of the motif, and it's super potato chippy. I also really love when in Colorwork mittens like this, there is a separate motif on the thumb, and here you have a really adorable burdock. These mittens are knit on 3mm needles with sport weight yarn, so the fabric itself is pretty dense for additional warmth, and like a lot of other Colorwork mitten patterns, they only come in one size, but of course you can increase the size if you use a slightly thicker yarn or a slightly thinner yarn, like for example in my case, because usually mittens like this don't really fit me. They usually come out a little bit too big, so if I were to knit this, I would probably use regular sock yarn on 2.5mm needles. And the last pattern for today, the one that might still prove useful in spring, is the Blomstra Hat. This is a pattern from Kaisa Fredriksson, and she has so many other beautiful colorwork designs in her sort of portfolio, and I liked this one because I think it's such a nice spin on like a regular hat, and before that I honestly never saw a colorwork hat that appealed to me, but this one is really different. This is an all-over colorwork hat that only uses 2 colors, and it has this beautiful interconnected flower and like leaf and stem motif, which I really like. The pattern of course has a chart for the motif and all of the increases, so it's going to be pretty easy to follow, but there are some longer floats you might need to keep track of. You knit it starting with the edge of the brim that is knit in one color, and then fold it, and then you switch to knitting the actual brim of the hat, and then you kind of switch directions and switch your wrong side and right side and start knitting the actual hat and to do the decreases. So it's super straightforward and really fun to go through, and it's also quite a potato chippy pattern. This pattern is knit on 3.75mm needles, and it comes in 3 sizes, and I would highly suggest you try and match the gauge exactly here, both in terms of stitches and row gauge, because otherwise you might have some fit issues. But since it calls for a combination of fingering weight yarn plus silk mohair or any like fluffy alpaca or something of that sort, it will be pretty easy to match your yarn if you don't want to use the recommended yarn, which I'm honestly not sure is available anymore because it calls for Rama Finul, and I'm not sure it's available anymore. It shows as discontinued in a couple of places. But anyway, there are so many different other yarn choices you can use for this pattern. For example, you can go for a really fluffy and warm unspun, something like Nuterin or Plotulopi, or if it's too scratchy for you, you can even make a version in Cardiff Cashmere, just in 2 colors. It still will be perfect for this gauge. And I've also noticed a really fun version of this hat that uses the Rosie colorwork motif instead of the one proposed in the pattern. So basically the possibilities are endless. You can also use this sizing as a template for any other like intarsia or colorwork motif you might like to use. I'm not really sure I can fit this hat in my current knitting schedule, but I really want to because it looks so fun, and I know what colors and yarn I'm going to use for this. I recently bought a really nice bundle of Plotulopi, and I have a white and a darker kind of, light brown color, which I think would be a really neutral spin on this hat, which should suit me quite well, and I can handle Plotulopi on my head. I have another hat in this yarn that I've been wearing for like 3 years at this point, and I absolutely adore it. Anyway, since I'm starting to ramble and my list is technically over, I think I'm gonna wrap it up. And as always, thank you so much for being here and watching. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. I really hope that this list inspired you to start something new or maybe helped you decide on a yarn choice. And as always, if you've knit any of the patterns I mentioned, please let me know your feedback in the comments. I'm really curious to know what you think. If you'd like to support the channel, just engaging with my videos and making sure you're subscribed is enough. But also, if you want to support me directly, I have my PayPal linked below, so you can buy me a coffee or support my future videos if you want to. But of course, it's not necessary. You don't have to do that. And all that's left to say is happy knitting. I wish you a wonderful spring ahead, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.